For 37 years, I dedicated every breath, every dollar, every sleepless night to my son. Yet the evening came when he looked me in the eye and declared, "You mean nothing to this family." As they forced me from the home I had gifted them, neighbors whispered of my downfall. But in that courtroom months later, I simply smiled and presented a weathered document to the judge. When she read its contents aloud, my son's face crumbled, and I finally understood what justice truly meant. Before we continue with this profound story of dignity and consequence, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to our channel if you appreciate thoughtful storytelling that honors life experience. Please also share your own insights in the comments. Your wisdom and perspective add tremendous value to our community. Now, let's return to this remarkable tale. The brass door handle felt cold beneath my weathered palm as I stood in the marble foyer of what had once been my sanctuary. The house stretched before me in all its calculated perfection: imported Italian marble, hand-selected chandeliers, windows that captured the Oregon hills like living paintings. Every surface gleamed with the kind of wealth that spoke softly but carried tremendous weight. My son Marcus moved through this space with the fluid confidence of ownership, his Italian leather shoes creating a measured rhythm against the floors I had chosen in the home I had purchased with money I had earned through decades of calculated sacrifice. At 42, he had grown into the kind of man who commanded boardrooms and charity galas with equal ease. His wife, Catherine, glided beside him, her designer dress flowing like liquid silk, her jewelry catching the afternoon light in carefully orchestrated flashes. I remember the day I had signed those papers, transferring this magnificent property into Marcus's name. The attorney had questioned my decision, suggesting trusts and contingencies, but I had waved away such complications. This was my son, the child I had raised after his mother's passing, the young man I had shaped through every crucial decision of his life. Trust, I believe then, was the foundation upon which families built their legacies. Catherine paused before an oil painting we had commissioned for their 5th anniversary, her fingertips barely grazing the gilded frame. She had always possessed an almost supernatural ability to make spaces feel smaller simply by occupying them. Her presence carried an electricity that demanded attention, whether in corporate conference rooms or intimate dinner parties. Tonight, however, something different flickered in her emerald eyes, a calculation I had never quite noticed before. Marcus turned toward me, his expression carrying the weight of a conversation I sensed we had been building toward for months. The distance between us felt oceanic despite the mere 12 feet of imported stone. When had we begun measuring our relationship in such careful increments? When had spontaneous embraces become scheduled appointments? "Father," he began, his voice carrying the professional tone he typically reserved for particularly challenging negotiations. "Catherine and I have been discussing our living arrangements." The phrase hung in the air like morning fog, beautiful but somehow ominous. I found myself studying his face, searching for traces of the boy who had once built elaborate blanket fortresses in this very room, who had spent countless evenings sketching architectural dreams at the kitchen table while I worked late into the night to fund his education. Catherine moved to stand beside her husband, her hand finding his arm with practiced grace. They presented a formidable team. These two, Marcus with his inherited business acumen and Catherine with her refined ruthlessness. Together, they had built an empire of connections and capital that impressed even my most successful colleagues. "We've reached a point in our lives," Catherine continued, her voice maintaining its characteristic silk over steel quality, "where we need to establish clearer boundaries around our personal space and family dynamics." I felt something shift inside my chest, a recognition of danger that comes from decades of reading people across conference tables and courtrooms. This was not a casual conversation about household arrangements. This was a carefully orchestrated presentation, complete with talking points and predetermined outcomes. The late afternoon sun slanted through those magnificent windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rugs I had selected during a business trip to Tehran 15 years earlier. Each piece in this house told a story of sacrifice, of delayed gratification, of choosing their future over my own immediate desires. The vintage wines in the cellar, the first edition books in the library, the art collection that had taken 2 decades to assemble, all of it had been chosen with Marcus's eventual inheritance in mind. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, though some deep instinct already understood the answer. Marcus straightened slightly, a gesture I recognized from his most challenging board meetings. "We think it would be beneficial for everyone if you found alternative living arrangements. Catherine and I need space to grow into our roles as the primary residents of this home." The word struck with surgical precision. Alternative living arrangements. Primary residence. The language of displacement dressed in the vocabulary of mutual benefit. I thought of my late wife, Margaret, how she used to joke that Marcus had inherited my stubbornness but her diplomatic tongue. She would have been proud of his articulation, even as she mourned his message. "This is quite sudden," I managed, my voice remaining steady despite the earthquake occurring beneath my ribs. Catherine's smile appeared, perfect and empty as a museum display. "Not sudden exactly. We've been considering this transition for some time. It simply feels like the natural progression of our family structure." Natural progression. As if my displacement were as inevitable as the changing seasons, as ordinary as leaves falling from trees. I wondered if they had rehearsed these phrases, polished them until they carried the weight of inevitability rather than choice. I looked around the room, seeing it suddenly through their eyes. My presence had become an inconvenience, a reminder of older generations and outdated authority structures. The man who had built this life, who had made their comfort possible, had become an obstacle to their vision of sophisticated independence. Marcus checked his watch, a Patek Philippe I had given him for his 35th birthday. "We've arranged for a moving service to assist with your belongings. There's a very nice senior community in Beaverton that Catherine's assistant researched. Clean, safe, with excellent amenities." Senior community. The phrase landed like a diagnosis, reducing 37 years of fatherhood to a housing category. I imagined Margaret's reaction to this moment, her protective fury at seeing our son attempt to warehouse the man who had sacrificed his own dreams to build Marcus's future. "And if I choose not to relocate?" I asked, genuinely curious about the mechanics of their plan. Catherine's green eyes hardened almost imperceptibly. "Father, let's not make this more difficult than necessary. We're offering you a dignified transition to a lifestyle more appropriate for your stage of life." My stage of life. At 68, I remained sharper than men half my age, more physically capable than Marcus despite his gym memberships and personal trainers. But they had categorized me, filed me under elderly parent, and proceeded accordingly. The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of unspoken histories and broken assumptions. I thought of the nights I had spent at this same dining table, teaching Marcus the fundamentals of business strategy and financial planning. The weekends we had invested in his college selection process, the careful negotiations with admissions officers and scholarship committees. The pride I'd felt watching him graduate summa cum laude, knowing that every sacrifice had contributed to his success. "I see," I said finally, the words carrying more understanding than they knew. Marcus's shoulders relaxed slightly, mistaking my acceptance for submission. "We knew you'd understand, Dad. This really is for the best." Catherine moved to the window, gazing out at the gardens I'd spent 15 years cultivating. "The movers can be here Thursday morning. That should give you enough time to pack your personal items." Personal items. As if 37 years of life could be reduced to a few boxes of photographs and clothing. As if the essence of a man's existence could be sorted into categories of keep and discard by the people he had loved most. I studied their faces, These two people I had welcomed into my life and supported through every ambition and challenge. Marcus had become exactly what I had hoped: successful, confident, articulate. Catherine had proven herself equally formidable in her chosen fields. Yet somehow, in achieving everything I had wanted for them, they had lost something I had never thought to teach: gratitude. Thursday, I repeated, tasting the word like medicine. The moving company is very professional, Catherine added, her tone suggesting magnanimous generosity. They'll handle everything carefully. I nodded slowly, my mind already beginning to work in ways they could not have anticipated. 37 years of building businesses and navigating complex negotiations had taught me that the most devastating responses often came wrapped in quiet acceptance. "I appreciate your thoughtfulness," I said, rising from my chair with a dignity that had carried me through decades of challenging conversations. "Thursday it is." Marcus smiled, the expression carrying relief and something that might have been affection. "I'm glad you understand, Dad. This really is the right thing for everyone." As I walked toward the stairs leading to what had been my bedroom for over 2 decades, I felt something crystallizing in my chest. Not anger, exactly, but a clarity that had been absent since Margaret's passing. They had made their choice with surgical precision and corporate efficiency. Now it was time for me to make mine. The morning of my departure arrived gray and cold, Portland's autumn asserting itself with the kind of persistent drizzle that seeps into everything. I stood in the empty bedroom that had once held a lifetime of memories, watching professional movers load boxes containing the carefully curated remnants of my existence. The moving truck idled in the circular driveway, its diesel engine adding a mechanical heartbeat to the orchestrated dismantling of my life. Marcus supervised from the front porch, his expression carrying the focused attention he typically reserved for important business transactions. Catherine remained inside, directing the careful removal of my belongings while protecting her own investments. I had spent the previous 3 days methodically packing, making decisions about which possessions merited transportation to my new circumstances. Margaret's jewelry, carefully preserved in its original boxes. Photographs spanning 4 decades of family celebrations and milestones. My collection of first-edition business biographies, accumulated during years of studying the strategies of more successful men. The process had been archaeological, each item excavated carrying the weight of memory and meaning. As the movers carried my mahogany desk down the front steps, I remembered the evening I had assembled it in this very room, Margaret reading aloud from a novel while I wrestled with increasingly complex hardware configurations. Marcus, then 14, had appeared periodically to offer assistance, his adolescent confidence endearing despite his complete lack of mechanical aptitude. The senior living facility Catherine had selected possessed all the amenities she had promised: 24-hour security, scheduled activities, professionally maintained grounds. Garden Court Estates marketed itself as sophisticated retirement living for discerning adults, which translated to expensive housing for people whose children preferred them at a comfortable distance. My new apartment measured 800 square feet, efficiently designed to accommodate the essential furniture of a downsized existence. The kitchen featured modern appliances scaled for single-person meal preparation. The living area provided sufficient space for a reading chair, a modest television, and carefully selected books. The bedroom accommodated a queen-sized bed and a single dresser. Everything necessary for a man whose active life had concluded. I stood in the center of this space, surrounded by boxes containing the edited version of my history, and felt something unexpected: liberation. For 37 years, every decision had been filtered through the question of how it would affect Marcus's future. Every investment opportunity, every vacation, every moment of potential self-indulgence had been weighed against my son's needs and ambitions. Now, for the first time since his birth, I was accountable only to myself. The revelation carried both terror and exhilaration in equal measure. During my first week at Garden Court Estates, I established routines that reflected my new reality. Morning coffee on the small balcony overlooking the courtyard garden. Afternoon walks through the surrounding neighborhood, observing the careful middle-class prosperity that defined this section of Beaverton. Evening reading in my comfortable chair, working through the stack of novels I had always intended to explore when business pressure subsided. The other residents proved surprisingly diverse in their backgrounds and current interests. Eleanor Matsumoto, a retired circuit court judge, maintained a sharp wit and comprehensive knowledge of legal precedents. Harold Krishnamurti had built and sold 3 technology companies before retiring to pursue his passion for 19th century photography. Martha Connolly continued writing the mystery novels that had supported her comfortably for 2 decades. These people had not been warehoused by embarrassed children. They had chosen their circumstances deliberately, attracted by the combination of independence and community that Garden Court Estates provided. Their presence forced me to confront an uncomfortable question. Had I been displaced, or had I been freed? The answer arrived during my second week, when Marcus called to inquire about my adjustment to retirement living. His voice carried the careful concern of a dutiful son checking on an aging parent's welfare. "How are you settling in, Dad?" he asked. "Catherine and I have been thinking about you." "I'm finding my rhythm," I replied, which was true in ways he could not have understood. "That's wonderful. We knew you'd appreciate the amenities." Catherine's assistant did excellent research. Catherine's assistant. The phrase illuminated the distance that had grown between us without my notice. I had become a problem requiring research and solutions, not a person deserving direct consideration. "The library here is quite impressive," I said. "I've been reading Dostoevsky." "That's great, Dad. Keeping the mind active is so important at your age." "At your age." The casual dismissal in those 3 words revealed everything about how he had learned to see me. Not as the man who had built the foundation for his success, but as an elderly relative requiring careful management and appropriate diversions. We spoke for another 10 minutes, his questions revealing genuine concern wrapped in the kind of professional distance he might show a valued client. When we ended the call, I sat in my reading chair for a long time, watching the late afternoon shadows lengthen across my small living space. That evening, I walked to the community center library and requested access to their legal databases. Eleanor Matsumoto, working at a nearby computer, noticed my research focus and offered assistance. "Property law can be labyrinthine," she observed, glancing at my screen. "Are you dealing with a complex situation?" "Potentially," I replied. "I'm trying to understand the details of a property transfer I completed 5 years ago." Eleanor's expression sharpened with professional interest. "Gift deed or sale?" "Gift deed. I transferred my home to my son, believing it was the appropriate time for such a transition. And now you're questioning that decision?" I met her gaze, seeing decades of courtroom experience reflected in her dark eyes. "Now I'm understanding it." She pulled a chair beside mine, her attention fully engaged. "Walk me through the basics." For the next 2 hours, I outlined the circumstances of the transfer while Eleanor took careful notes. Her questions revealed a mind still operating at full judicial capacity, probing for details and implications I had not considered during my original decision-making process. "This is fascinating," she said finally. "You essentially gave them a 7-figure asset with no conditions or contingencies. I trusted their judgment and character." "Trust is beautiful in personal relationships," Eleanor replied. "But in legal documents, it's naive." Her assessment stung because it was accurate. I had approached one of the most significant financial decisions of my life with the kind of blind optimism typically reserved for much smaller stakes. "Is there any recourse?" I asked. Eleanor smiled, the expression carrying decades of experience with exactly these kinds of family complications. "That depends on several factors. Do you have copies of all the original documents?" Everything is in my safe deposit box at First National. Then tomorrow, we retrieve those documents and conduct a proper analysis. Property law contains more ambiguities than most people realize. That night, I lay in my narrow bed staring at the ceiling of my carefully appointed apartment, feeling something I had not experienced since Margaret's death: anticipation. For 37 years, I had been the father, the provider, the steady foundation supporting other people's dreams. Tomorrow, I would begin exploring what it meant to be a man whose first responsibility was to himself. The safe deposit box contained the carefully organized documentation of a lifetime's major decisions. Eleanor and I spread the papers across one of the library's larger tables, creating a chronological map of my financial relationship with Marcus and Catherine. "Here's the interesting detail," Eleanor said, studying the gift deed through her reading glasses. "The transfer was conditional upon your continued residence in the property." The language is somewhat archaic, but the intent seems clear. I leaned forward, studying the paragraph she indicated. "I don't remember that clause. It's buried in the legal boilerplate. Most people never read these sections carefully." Eleanor's finger traced the relevant text. "This suggests that their request for your departure might have invalidated the original transfer." The implications began to crystallize in my mind. "Are you saying I might still have legal claim to the property?" "I'm saying we need to research the relevant case law and precedents. This could be much more complex than any of you realized." We spent the following week conducting research that felt like detective work. Eleanor's experience and my business background proved complementary. She understood the legal frameworks while I grasped the financial implications. Together, we constructed a case that grew stronger with each precedent we discovered. The law, it appeared, frowned upon conditional gifts that were subsequently violated by the recipients. Several Oregon cases had established clear principles protecting donors who had been displaced after completing property transfers. The courts consistently held that conditional generosity carried ongoing obligations for the beneficiaries. They made a significant error, Eleanor concluded during our 5th research session. By asking you to leave, they may have forfeited their claim to the property. What would that mean practically? It could mean the deed reverts to you automatically. It could mean they owe you compensation equivalent to the property's current value. It could mean several different outcomes, depending on how we choose to proceed. The phrase, "how we choose to proceed," hung in the air between us like a bridge I had not realized existed. Eleanor was offering to partner with me in pursuing justice, lending her considerable expertise to what was fundamentally my personal battle. "Why would you want to help me with this?" I asked. Her smile carried both warmth and steel. "Because I've spent 40 years watching people take advantage of others' generosity. Because entitled children need to learn that actions carry consequences. Because you strike me as a man who deserves better than he's been receiving." That evening, I called Marcus to arrange a meeting. My request seemed to surprise him. Our relationship had settled into a pattern of brief, scheduled phone conversations rather than face-to-face interactions. "Is everything all right, Dad?" he asked. "You sound different." "I'm fine. I simply have some family matters I'd like to discuss." "Of course. Would you like to come for dinner Sunday evening? Catherine's been saying we should have you over." The invitation carried the tone of charitable obligation, as if they were volunteering at a soup kitchen rather than hosting the man who had made their lifestyle possible. Nevertheless, I accepted graciously. Sunday evening arrived crisp and clear, autumn asserting itself with the kind of precision that made Oregon famous. I drove to the house I had once called home, parking in the circular driveway where I had taught Marcus to drive 25 years earlier. Catherine answered the door, wearing an elegant cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her smile appeared genuine, though I noticed how her eyes quickly assessed my appearance, perhaps checking for signs of decline or inappropriate neediness. "Father, you look wonderful," she said, embracing me with a careful affection typically reserved for valuable but fragile antiques. Retirement clearly agrees with you. Marcus appeared behind her, his own smile carrying similar notes of cautious warmth. He had gained weight since our last meeting, his success manifesting in the kind of soft prosperity that came from excellent restaurants and reduced physical activity. Dad, come in, come in. Can I get you a drink? The house felt different now that I was visiting rather than inhabiting it. The spaces seemed larger, more formal, arranged for presentation rather than comfort. They had made subtle changes, new artwork, rearranged furniture, fresh flowers, and expensive vases. The cumulative effect was striking. My influence had been carefully edited from the environment. We settled in the living room with drinks and engaged in the kind of polite conversation typically reserved for distant relatives or casual acquaintances. Marcus updated me on his recent business successes. Catherine described her latest charitable commitments. I shared carefully selected details about my new community and developing friendships. The dinner itself proved elaborate. Catherine had engaged a catering service to prepare what she described as father's favorite dishes. The gesture would have been touching if it hadn't revealed how little she actually knew about my preferences. The beef Wellington was beautifully prepared, but far richer than I had ever enjoyed. The wine selection was impressive, but completely unfamiliar. After the main course, as we lingered over dessert and coffee, I introduced the topic I had come to discuss. I've been reviewing some legal documents recently. I began my tone conversational. Specifically, the paperwork from when I transferred the house to you. Marcus's expression shifted slightly, though his voice remained casual. Oh, is there some kind of problem with the title or something? Not exactly a problem, I replied. More of an interesting discovery about the conditions that were attached to the original transfer. Catherine's attention sharpened, her attorney's instincts apparently detecting potential complications. What kind of conditions? The gift deed included a clause requiring my continued residence in the property. When you asked me to relocate, that condition was violated. The silence that followed carried weight beyond mere surprise. I watched them exchange glances, communicating in the shorthand that long-married couples develop for navigating unexpected challenges. Marcus spoke first, his voice carefully controlled. Dad, I think you might be misunderstanding some technical language in those documents. Actually, I've had them reviewed by a retired circuit court judge who specializes in property law. The language is quite clear. Catherine's composure cracked almost imperceptibly. Are you suggesting that our request for you to find alternative living arrangements somehow invalidated the deed? I'm not suggesting anything, I replied. I'm stating what the law appears to say about conditional gifts that are subsequently violated. Marcus leaned forward, his business negotiation instincts engaging. Dad, let's think about this rationally. We all agreed that separate living arrangements would be better for everyone. You seem happy at Garden Court Estates. I'm content with my current circumstances, I agreed. But contentment doesn't change the legal reality of what occurred. Catherine's green eyes had gone very cold. What exactly are you proposing? I'm not proposing anything tonight. I simply wanted you to be aware that I've discovered some complications with our previous arrangement. The remainder of the evening proceeded with the kind of forced politeness typically reserved for business dinners between competing companies. Marcus and Catherine maintained their gracious hosting while clearly calculating the implications of my revelation. I finished my coffee and declined their offer of after-dinner drinks, sensing that my mission had been accomplished. As Catherine walked me to the door, she attempted one final diplomatic initiative. Father, I hope you understand that our decision about living arrangements was made with everyone's best interests in mind. I understand exactly how that decision was made, I replied. Now we'll see how other decisions unfold. Driving back to Garden Court Estates, I felt a satisfaction I had not experienced since the early days of building my business. For the first time in months, I was not reacting to other people's choices, but creating choices of my own. Eleanor was waiting in the community center library when I arrived the following morning, Her legal research spread across our usual table like battle plans. "How do they respond?" she asked. "About as well as you'd expect. Surprise, concern, and immediate strategic thinking." "Good. That means they understand the seriousness of their situation." Eleanor pushed a thick folder toward me. "I've been researching comparable cases, and the precedents are quite favorable." The folder contained detailed analyses of 7 different property disputes involving conditional gifts and subsequent violations. In each case, the courts had ruled in favor of the original donors, establishing clear principles about the obligations of gift recipients. The most recent case awarded the plaintiff full restoration of the property plus damages, Eleanor noted. The judge specifically cited the principle that generosity should not be weaponized against the generous. What would full restoration mean in practical terms? It could mean they have to transfer the property back to you immediately. It could mean they owe you the current fair market value, which has probably increased significantly since your original gift. It could mean several different outcomes. I studied the case summaries, my business experience helping me understand the broader implications. This could be financially devastating for them. Yes, Eleanor agreed, which is why they'll probably want to negotiate a settlement rather than risk a court judgment. The word settlement hung between us like a doorway to multiple possible futures. I could pursue maximum damages and watch my son's carefully constructed life crumble under financial pressure. I could negotiate a moderate resolution that taught important lessons without destroying his future. I could walk away entirely, accepting my displacement as the price of family peace. "What do you think I should do?" I asked. Eleanor's smile carried the wisdom of 4 decades resolving human conflicts. "I think you should decide what kind of father you want to be remembered as. The vengeful type who destroys his children for their mistakes, or the principled type who teaches them that actions have consequences." Her distinction illuminated the choice I actually faced. This was not about money or property, or even justice in its purest form. This was about the kind of man I had become and the kind of legacy I wanted to leave. The call from Marcus came 3 days later, his voice carrying a tension I had not heard since his college years when particularly challenging exams had tested his confidence. "Dad, I think we need to talk about this legal situation you've discovered. I'm available whenever you'd like to meet. Could you come to my office tomorrow afternoon? I'd like Catherine to be present, and I'd prefer to handle this in a professional setting." His office occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown building, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Portland's carefully planned urban landscape. The space reflected Marcus's success with understated elegance, expensive furniture arranged for both comfort and impression, artwork selected by professional consultants, technology integrated seamlessly into traditional design elements. Catherine was already present when I arrived, her posture conveying the kind of controlled tension typically associated with high-stakes negotiations. She had chosen her outfit carefully, a charcoal business suit that projected authority while maintaining feminine sophistication. Marcus gestured toward a seating area arranged around a glass coffee table. "Thank you for coming, Dad. We've had some time to research the situation you brought to our attention." "And what have you discovered?" Catherine answered, her voice carrying the precise diction of someone who had spent years in courtrooms and boardrooms. "We've confirmed that the deed language is somewhat ambiguous regarding residence requirements." "Somewhat ambiguous?" "Our attorney believes the language could be interpreted multiple ways," Marcus added. "But we also understand that litigation would be expensive and time-consuming for everyone involved." I recognize the opening gambit of a negotiation, the careful positioning that preceded more substantive discussions. They had calculated their exposure and determined that settlement was preferable to courtroom uncertainty. "What are you proposing?" I asked. Marcus and Catherine exchanged glances before she responded. "We think a financial adjustment might be appropriate, given the circumstances." "What kind of adjustment?" $500,000, Marcus said. as compensation for any inconvenience or misunderstanding about the original arrangement. The figure hung in the air between us, significant enough to demonstrate serious intent while remaining well below the property's current market value. They were offering to buy their way out of a potentially catastrophic legal situation. That's a generous offer, I acknowledged. We think it's fair, Catherine said. It recognizes that there may have been some confusion about the original terms while allowing everyone to move forward positively. I studied their faces, seeing the careful calculation behind their apparent reasonableness. They had determined that $500,000 was an acceptable price for maintaining control of a property worth significantly more. I'll need some time to consider your proposal, I said. Of course, Marcus replied. Take whatever time you need. As I prepared to leave, Catherine made one final comment that revealed more than she probably intended. Father, we hope you understand that our goal has always been to do what's best for the family. I understand exactly what your goals have been, I replied. The question now is whether those goals serve everyone fairly. That evening, I sat in my reading chair at Garden Court Estates, watching the sunset paint the courtyard garden in shades of gold and amber. Eleanor knocked on my door precisely at 7 o'clock, carrying a bottle of wine and her characteristic expression of focused intelligence. They made an offer, I told her as we settled on my small balcony. How much? 500,000. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Reasonable, but not generous. They're trying to minimize their exposure while avoiding a court battle they might lose. What do you think the property is worth now? Based on recent comparable sales, probably $1.8 to $2 million. They're offering you roughly 25% of the current value. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the other residents tend to their small balcony gardens or walk their dogs through the courtyard paths. These people had created meaningful lives within careful constraints, finding dignity and purpose in circumstances that others might consider diminished. The money isn't really the point, is it? Eleanor asked. No, it's about respect, about understanding that generosity carries obligations for the recipients. Then the question becomes, will accepting their offer teach them that lesson? Or will it simply confirm that problems can be solved with sufficient payment? Her insight cut to the heart of my dilemma. I could accept their settlement and achieve financial compensation while potentially reinforcing their belief that money solved everything. Or I could pursue a more comprehensive resolution that forced them to confront the deeper implications of their behavior. There's a third option, Eleanor continued. You could propose terms that address both the financial and relational aspects of this situation. What kind of terms? Require them to acknowledge publicly that they violated the original agreement. Insist on regular family interactions that demonstrate genuine relationship rather than obligatory contact. Create conditions that force them to treat you as a person rather than a problem. The idea intrigued me because it addressed what I truly wanted. Not revenge or even money, but recognition of my worth as a human being who deserved better than casual dismissal. Could such terms be legally enforced? Some could. Others would depend on their willingness to honor the spirit of an agreement rather than just its letter. I called Marcus the following morning and requested another meeting. This time, I suggested lunch at a restaurant of my choosing, a quiet establishment where I had often taken business clients who required careful handling. Marcus and Catherine arrived precisely on time, their expressions carrying the focused attention of people prepared for serious negotiation. I had spent the morning refining my proposal, crafting terms that addressed both practical and symbolic concerns. I've given considerable thought to your offer, I began once we had ordered our meals. While I appreciate the financial gesture, I don't think money alone resolves the underlying issues. Catherine's shoulders tensed slightly. What additional concerns do you have? The way this situation developed reflects fundamental problems in how we relate to each other as family members. Any resolution needs to address those dynamics, not just the legal complications. Marcus leaned forward. What specifically are you looking for, Dad? I consulted the notes I had prepared. First, I want a formal acknowledgement that your request for my departure violated the terms of the original gift deed. Second, I want a structured plan for regular family interactions that demonstrate genuine relationship rather than charitable obligation. Third, I want involvement in major decisions that affect family assets or legacy planning. The silence that followed carried the weight of their processing these unexpected requirements. They had anticipated financial negotiations, not relationship counseling. That seems like a significant expansion beyond the legal issues, Catherine said carefully. The legal issues arose from relational failures, I replied. Addressing only the symptoms while ignoring the causes would be short-sighted. Marcus's business instincts appeared to be wrestling with his personal emotions. Dad, are you saying you want to move back into the house? I'm saying I want respect. I want acknowledgement that my generosity was met with ingratitude. I want assurance that future interactions will reflect appreciation rather than inconvenience. Catherine's green eyes had gone very cold. Those are difficult terms to quantify or enforce. Some of the most important agreements in life resist quantification, I replied. The question is whether you value our relationship enough to make good faith efforts toward repair. Our meals arrived, providing a natural pause in the conversation. I watched them exchange glances and silent communications while we ate, clearly recalibrating their approach to negotiations they had not anticipated. Marcus spoke first when we resumed discussion. Dad, I want you to know that we do value our relationship. Sometimes family dynamics get complicated, and maybe we didn't handle everything as thoughtfully as we should have. It was the closest thing to an apology I had heard from him since childhood, carefully worded, but carrying genuine acknowledgement of error. I appreciate that recognition, I said. The question now is how we move forward constructively. Catherine had remained silent during this exchange, her attorney's mind apparently calculating the implications of various responses. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a different quality than I had heard before. Father, what would successful family interactions look like to you? What would demonstrate the respect and appreciation you're seeking? The question seemed genuine rather than tactical, as if she were actually trying to understand my perspective rather than simply managing a negotiation. Monthly dinners that feel like genuine family time rather than charitable obligations, I said. Inclusion in conversations about major life decisions or changes. Acknowledgement of my experience and wisdom rather than dismissal based on age. Recognition that my generosity was a gift of love, not a transaction to be forgotten. That sounds reasonable, Marcus said, though his voice carried uncertainty about how such requirements might be implemented. It sounds like family, I replied, which is what I thought we already were. We spent another hour discussing practical details and specific commitments. Marcus and Catherine agreed to formal acknowledgement of their error, regular family interactions, and consultation regarding major financial decisions. In exchange, I would accept a modified settlement that reflected the property's current value more fairly while allowing them to maintain ownership. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Catherine made a comment that surprised me with its apparent sincerity. Father, I think I've been treating you as if your value to our family ended when your financial contributions were no longer needed. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. The apology carried weight because it addressed the core issue that had been festering beneath our surface civility. I had become expendable in their minds once my usefulness had been exhausted. Apology accepted, I said. The question now is whether we can build something better going forward. 6 months later, I stood in the garden behind the house I had once owned, watching Marcus teach his 3-year-old daughter to plant tomato seedlings. Catherine worked nearby, her business suit replaced by gardening clothes, her attention focused on creating raised beds for herbs and vegetables. The monthly dinners had evolved into weekly family time that included extended conversations about everything from business strategy to grandparenting philosophy. Marcus had begun seeking my advice on complex negotiations, acknowledging that my experience offered valuable perspective. Catherine had surprised me by expressing genuine interest in my thoughts about her career development and long-term goals. The financial settlement had allowed me to purchase a comfortable home in the same neighborhood, close enough for regular interaction, but independent enough to maintain my autonomy. Garden Court Estates had provided valuable lessons about community and self-sufficiency, but I had discovered that I was not yet ready for the structured environment of managed retirement. Eleanor Matsumoto had become not just a legal advisor, but a genuine friend, someone whose wisdom and humor enriched my daily experience. Her assistance with my family situation had led to consultation opportunities with other residents facing similar challenges, giving me a sense of purpose that extended beyond my own concerns. As I watched my granddaughter's delighted concentration on her gardening project, I reflected on the lessons that had emerged from what began as a painful displacement. Marcus and Catherine had learned that generosity carried ongoing obligations for gratitude and respect. I had learned that self-advocacy was not selfishness, but necessary for maintaining dignity and healthy relationships. The legal victory had been less important than the relational restoration it had enabled. Money and property were tools for creating security and comfort, but they could not replace the fundamental human need for recognition and respect. "Grandpa," my granddaughter called, holding up a small plant with soil-covered roots. "Look what I grew." "That's beautiful, sweetheart," I replied, kneeling beside her to examine her work. "With proper care and attention, it will grow into something wonderful." Marcus smiled at the exchange, understanding the deeper meaning in my words. 3 generations working together in a garden, each contributing their unique strengths to create something that would nourish them all. The afternoon sun slanted through the mature trees I had planted 15 years earlier, casting dappled shadows across the beds where we worked. Everything grew in its proper season, given adequate patience and appropriate conditions. As we finished our gardening and moved toward the house for dinner, I felt the satisfaction that comes from problems well solved and relationships carefully restored. The yellow document that had seemed so devastating in that courtroom had become the foundation for something stronger and more sustainable than what we had lost. Justice, I had learned, was not about punishment or revenge, but about creating conditions where everyone could thrive with dignity and mutual respect. Sometimes that required difficult conversations and uncomfortable confrontations. But the alternative, accepting disrespect and displacement, served no one's long-term interests. Walking into the house where 3 generations of my family would share a meal prepared together, I understood that the most meaningful victories were those that left everyone stronger and more connected than before the conflict began. Thank you for joining me in this story of courage, dignity, and the importance of self-respect. If this resonated with your own life experiences, I invite you to subscribe for more thoughtful narratives that explore the complexity of family, loyalty, and standing up for what's right. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one and truly value the wisdom our community brings to these conversations. Your stories and insights help others who may be facing similar challenges.